The first time I saw a human child get struck by Officer Vex-9, I thought it would be just another incident report. Another boring day in the administrative hell that was Galactic Council Station Omega-7. Boy, was I wrong. My name is Krill 448, and I've been a council observer for nearly 2 decades. Seen it all, documented it all. Wars that lasted centuries, peace treaties written in 17 different languages, trade disputes that made grown Zelthans weep. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened when humanity decided to show the galaxy what proportional response really meant. It started on what the humans call Tuesday. Funny how their primitive time-keeping system somehow made everything more ominous. The station was buzzing with its usual mix of species, Gorthaks arguing over shipping lanes, Velthrani diplomats practicing their fake smiles, and the ever-present smell of sulfur from the Rixian delegates' breathing apparatus. Then she walked in. Captain Torres of the human delegation, followed by what appeared to be a small human offspring. The child couldn't have been more than 8 cycles old, with those ridiculously large eyes that humans somehow evolved to make every other species feel protective. She was clutching some sort of primitive toy, a stuffed creature that looked like it had survived several small explosions. "Daddy, why does everyone keep staring?" The child whispered, tugging on Torres' uniform sleeve. Torres knelt down, his expression softening in that peculiar way humans did around their young. "Because they've never seen anyone as brave as you, Emma. Remember what we practiced." The kid, Emma, straightened her tiny shoulders and nodded with the kind of determination that should have been illegal in something so small. "Stand tall, speak truth, fear nothing." I almost choked on my nutrient paste. These Deathworlders were teaching their children battle mantras now, as if they weren't terrifying enough already. The meeting was supposed to be routine, humanity's formal application for increased trade routes through the Kepler sector. Standard bureaucratic nonsense that would normally take 3 hours of mind-numbing negotiations and end with everyone agreeing to reconvene in 6 months. Officer Vex-9 was handling security screening. Now Vex-9 was what we politely called old school. He believed in order, discipline, and the natural superiority of established galactic species over these newcomer humans. He'd made his opinions quite clear during several previous incidents involving human cultural misunderstandings. The screening process was going normally until Emma's toy triggered the contraband detector. Some sort of primitive electronic device embedded in the stuffed animal's chest. "Remove the device," Vex-9 commanded in his typical authoritative tone. Emma looked confused, clutching her toy tighter. "It's just Mr. Buttons. He plays lullabies when I'm scared." "Contraband is contraband," Vex-9 replied, reaching for the toy with one of his 6 manipulator arms. "Hand it over, human spawn." Here's where things got interesting. Emma took a step back, and Captain Torres moved protectively in front of her. "Officer, it's a child's comfort item. Surely we can find an alternative to confiscation." Vex-9's eye stalks rotated to focus on Torres with the kind of look that had made lesser species wet themselves. "Are you questioning Council security protocols, human?" "I'm asking for reasonable accommodation for a minor child." The tension in the room became thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. Other species' delegates began backing away, recognizing the signs of an imminent human diplomatic incident. I pulled up my recording equipment, sensing this was about to become much more than routine documentation. Vex-9 made his move, reaching past Torres to grab the toy directly from Emma's hands. The child, startled, stumbled backward and fell. In her panic, she held onto Mr. Buttons even tighter. That's when Vex-9 made the mistake that would reshape galactic politics forever. He struck her. Not a gentle tap or a warning gesture. A full-force backhand across a child's face with enough force to send her sprawling across the floor. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The silence that followed was the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. Emma lay there for a moment, too shocked to cry, a bright red mark already blooming across her cheek. Then Captain Torres moved. I've seen combat footage from dozens of species, watched Krellian berserkers tear through enemy lines, witnessed Thangor warriors leap across impossible distances. But nothing had prepared me for the cold, calculated fury of a human parent protecting their child. Torres didn't shout, didn't rage. He simply walked over to his daughter, knelt down and gently helped her to her feet. His voice was soft, almost tender when he spoke. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't make a sound. The kid had more composure than most trained soldiers. Torres stood slowly, still holding Emma's hand, and turned to face Vex-9. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet menace that made hardened criminals confess their crimes. "Officer, you just struck a child under diplomatic protection." Vex-9 puffed up his thorax, clearly not understanding the magnitude of his error. The spawn refused to comply with security protocols. Physical correction was necessary. Physical correction. Torres repeated the words like he was tasting something particularly foul. On an 8-year-old girl, species is irrelevant, age is irrelevant. Compliance is mandatory. I watched Torres' expression change, and every survival instinct I'd developed over 2 decades of observing dangerous situations started screaming at me to leave. Immediately. "I need to make a call," Torres said, his voice still unnaturally calm. He activated his communication device, and I managed to catch part of the conversation through my recording equipment. "Admiral Morrison?" "Yes, sir, it's Torres. We have a code black situation at Station Omega-7. Officer Designation Vex-9 just struck Emma during security screening. Physical assault on a minor under diplomatic protection." There was a pause. "Understood, sir. 48 hours. "Yes, sir, we'll maintain position and document everything." He closed the communication and turned back to Vex-9, who was now looking slightly less confident. "Officer, I'm formally notifying you that you have just committed an act of violence against a human child under the protection of the United Earth Alliance. This incident has been reported to Earth Command, and you will be hearing from my superiors shortly." Vex-9's mandibles clicked dismissively. Human threats hold no weight here. This is Council jurisdiction. Torres smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Threats? Officer, I'm not threatening you. I'm simply informing you that Earth takes a very dim view of anyone who harms our children. What happens next is entirely out of my hands." He picked up Emma, who immediately buried her face in his shoulder, and walked toward the exit. Just before leaving, he turned back one final time. "Officer Vex-9, I suggest you update your will." The next 48 hours were the longest of my career. I tried to go about my normal duties, filing reports, attending meetings, pretending that everything was perfectly normal. But there was an undercurrent of tension throughout the station that made everyone nervous. The humans who remained were polite, professional, and absolutely terrifying in their composure. Captain Torres spent most of his time in the human embassy section with Emma, who had recovered from her shock with the resilience that seemed typical of human offspring. She was back to playing with Mr. Buttons, which the humans had somehow negotiated to keep, and asking endless questions about the various alien species on the station. But the other humans were different. They moved with a purpose that made seasoned warriors step out of their way. Phone calls were made in hushed tones. The equipment was quietly relocated. Personnel movements that looked random but followed patterns that suggested military precision. On the morning of the second day, I was reviewing incident reports when my communication device chimed with an urgent message: "Unknown fleet detected at system perimeter. All personnel report to stations." I rushed to the observation deck and immediately understood why the station's proximity alarms were screaming. Ships, hundreds of them. Human ships, to be precise. Everything from massive dreadnoughts that could crack planets to sleek destroyers that moved like predatory fish through space. They arranged themselves in a formation that was both beautiful and absolutely terrifying. At the center of the fleet was something I'd only heard about in whispered conversations among intelligence officers: the Retribution, humanity's most advanced warfare vessel. to ship that had never been defeated in battle and had earned the nickname Planet Breaker after the Century incident. Station Commander Thex Prime called an emergency assembly. Every delegate, every official, every being with even minor authority was summoned to the main council chamber. The atmosphere was thick with panic, confusion, and the growing realization that humanity might be slightly more dangerous than anyone had previously calculated. Commander Thex Prime, a Vortak with enough political experience to have survived 3 regime changes, addressed the assembly with barely controlled fear in his voice. The human fleet has requested permission to board. They claim to be conducting an official investigation into an incident involving violence against a diplomatic dependent. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several species representatives looked genuinely confused, having forgotten about the incident with Emma entirely. Surely this is an overreaction, Council Member Zephyr 12 commented. One minor altercation hardly justifies this level of military presence. That's when Captain Torres entered the chamber, still carrying Emma, who was looking around with the wide-eyed fascination of a child seeing a zoo for the first time. Council members, Torres said, his voice carrying easily through the large space, allow me to introduce you to Admiral Sarah Morrison, commander of the Third Fleet, and the woman who will be conducting this investigation. The main view screen activated, showing the interior of what was obviously a military command center. The woman who appeared on screen looked like she could bench press a small planet and would consider it light exercise. Admiral Morrison's voice filled the chamber with the kind of authority that made planets surrender without firing a shot. Station Command, this is Admiral Morrison of the United Earth Alliance Third Fleet. 47 hours ago, one of your security officers committed an act of violence against a human child under diplomatic protection. This constitutes an act of war under Earth Alliance military code. The silence that followed could have been used to preserve food. However, Morrison continued, Earth Command recognizes that this may have been the action of a single individual rather than station policy. Therefore, we are prepared to limit our response to the individual responsible, provided he is turned over to human justice within the next 60 minutes. Commander Thex Prime's translator started smoking from overuse as he stammered, Admiral, surely we can resolve this through proper diplomatic channels. The Council has established procedures for addressing such incidents. Morrison's smile was the kind of expression that probably haunted the nightmares of enemy commanders. Commander, let me explain something about human psychology. We are a species that has survived ice ages, plagues, natural disasters, and our own violent nature for thousands of years. We have evolved exactly one unbendable rule: harm our children, and we will end you. She paused, letting that sink in. Your officer struck an 8-year-old girl. A child who was scared, in a strange place, surrounded by aliens, holding the only familiar thing she had. He could have simply explained the situation, asked for cooperation, or called for a translator. Instead, he chose violence against a child. Emma, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. Admiral Morrison? Mr. Buttons wasn't really contraband. He just plays music when I have bad dreams. Morrison's expression softened slightly when she addressed Emma. I know, sweetheart, and I'm going to make sure no one ever hurts you like that again. Then her attention returned to the assembly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. 58 minutes, Commander. Officer Vex-9 will be turned over to human justice, or we will come and get him ourselves. And trust me, you really don't want us to come and get him ourselves. The screen went dark, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. I looked around at the faces of some of the galaxy's most powerful beings and saw something I'd never witnessed before: genuine fear of humanity. And somewhere in the back of my mind I couldn't help but think that Officer Vex-9 had made the last mistake of his very short remaining life. The next 57 minutes were the most educational of my entire career. I learned more about human psychology, galactic politics, and the fine art of controlled terror than any university could have taught me. Officer Vex-9, to his credit, initially tried to maintain his authority. He stood in the security bay, surrounded by his fellow officers, declaring that no primitive Deathworlder species would dictate terms to the Galactic Council. "Let them come," he announced with the confidence of someone who had clearly never studied human military history. What can they possibly do that the Council hasn't faced before? I wanted to laugh. Or cry. Maybe both. Commander Vex-9, however, was busy making the kind of calculations that kept civilizations alive. He pulled up humanity's military record on the main tactical display, and I watched the color drain from his exoskeleton as he scrolled through the data. "Officer Vex-9, he said slowly, "are you familiar with the Proxima campaign?" "Ancient history," Vex-9 dismissed. 3 months ago, humans versus the Korthax Empire. The Korthax had superior numbers, better technology, and home system advantage. Vex-9's voice was getting progressively quieter. The humans won in 17 days. Total victory. The Korthax surrendered unconditionally. Propaganda. The Titan incident. To exaggerated reports. The fact that human ships are currently capable of glassing this entire station without breaking formation. That one finally got Vex-9's attention. I decided this was an excellent time to position myself near the emergency evacuation pods, just in case. With 40 minutes remaining on Admiral Morrison's deadline, something interesting happened. Captain Torres received another communication, this time on an open channel that everyone in the chamber could hear. "Torres, this is Colonel Rebecca Hayes aboard the destroyer Vengeance. We've got visual confirmation of the target. Request permission to begin psychological operations." Torres looked around the chamber, his expression unreadable. "Negative, Colonel. We're still within diplomatic parameters. Maintain position." "Sir, the crew is motivated. They've seen the footage of the incident." "I understand, Colonel. But we follow protocol." Admiral Morrison's timeline stands. The communication ended, but the message was clear. The entire human fleet knew what had happened to Emma, and they were not happy about it. I found myself studying the tactical display more closely. The human ships weren't just arranged randomly. They formed what military strategists call a demonstration of force, close enough to be threatening, positioned to show off their capabilities, but not actually engaging in hostile action. Yet, Emma, meanwhile, seemed completely unaware that her injured cheek had triggered what could potentially become the shortest war in galactic history. She was sitting in her father's lap, coloring on a data pad and occasionally asking questions about the different species in the chamber. "Daddy, why does that blue person have so many arms?" "That's Officer Vex-9, sweetheart. He's the one who hurt you." Emma studied Vex-9 for a moment with the brutal honesty that only children possess. "He doesn't look very smart." The accuracy of that assessment was becoming more apparent by the minute. With 30 minutes left, Admiral Morrison contacted the station again. This time she wasn't alone. The view screen showed her standing in what was obviously a briefing room, surrounded by other human military officers who looked like they could arm wrestle black holes and win. "Commander Vex-9, I'm transmitting a complete tactical analysis of your station's defensive capabilities. Please review it and confirm your understanding." The data that flooded the station's computers was simultaneously impressive and terrifying. The humans hadn't just shown up with ships. They had spent the last 2 days conducting detailed reconnaissance of every system, every weapon, every possible defensive measure the station possessed. And they had counters for all of it. "As you can see," Morrison continued, "your station's shields would last approximately 4 minutes under concentrated fire from my fleet. Your defensive weapons have a maximum effective range that is shorter than our minimum engagement distance. Your evacuation systems could handle maybe 30% of your current population in the time it would take us to disable your engines." She paused to let that information sink in. "However, we're not here to conquer your station or harm innocent civilians. We want one individual. Officer Vex-9. Turn him over, and my fleet returns to Earth space. Refuse, and we take him anyway, along with anyone who tries to stop us." Commander Thex Prime looked like he was calculating the odds of his own survival. Admiral, surely there must be some middle ground. Perhaps Officer Vex-9 could face council justice, with human observers present. Morrison's laugh was the kind of sound that probably made stars go supernova. Commander, let me tell you about human justice. When someone hurts our children, we don't delegate responsibility. We handle it personally. The view screen shifted to show the interior of what appeared to be a cargo bay. But it wasn't storing supplies. It was full of humans, hundreds of them, all in military gear, all armed, all looking like they had volunteered for this mission specifically because they wanted to personally express their opinions about people who strike children. These are volunteers from across the fleet, Morrison explained. Marines, pilots, engineers, even kitchen staff. Every single one of them requested permission to participate in Officer Vex-9's retrieval. I had to turn away 3,000 applicants. Emma looked up from her coloring. Are all those people coming to help me? Torres nodded. Yes, sweetheart, every single one. That's a lot of helpers. Humans take care of their own, Emma, all of them. With 15 minutes remaining, something unexpected happened. A group of junior council officers, led by a young Zephyrian named Quill 7, approached Commander Thex Prime. Sir, Quill 7 said, we've reviewed the incident reports and the human response protocols. We formally request that Officer Vex-9 be turned over to human justice. Thex Prime's eye stalks swiveled in surprise. Officer, you're suggesting we abandon one of our own? Sir, with respect, Vex-9 abandoned council principles when he struck a child. The humans are offering a proportional response. If we refuse, they've made it clear they'll take disproportional action. Another officer stepped forward. Commander, we've run the tactical simulations. If the humans decide to take Vex-9 by force, station casualties could reach 60%. And that's assuming they're trying to minimize collateral damage. Which they probably would be, added a third. Humans have a documented history of protecting non-combatants, even during military operations. I found myself nodding along with their assessment. Say what you will about human aggression, but their military doctrine actually showed remarkable restraint toward civilians. They were precise in their violence, surgical in their retribution. Unfortunately for Vex-9, he had placed himself directly in the crosshairs of that precision. With 10 minutes left, Admiral Morrison made her final contact. Commander, this is your last opportunity to resolve this diplomatically. My Marines are loaded, my ships are armed, and my patience is exhausted. Officer Vex-9 struck a human child. That makes him a legitimate military target under our rules of engagement. Emma suddenly stood up and walked toward the view screen. Her father started to stop her, but she was determined. Admiral Morrison, can I ask you something? Morrison's expression immediately softened. Of course, sweetheart. What's your question? If Mr. Vex-9 says he's sorry, would that help? The silence that followed was profound. Here was an 8-year-old child, still bearing the mark where she'd been struck, asking if an apology might prevent a war. Morrison took a deep breath before answering. Emma, that's a very kind question. But some actions require more than apologies. When adults hurt children, other adults have to make sure it never happens again. Emma nodded solemnly, like when Tommy pushed me at school and the teacher made him sit in timeout. Exactly like that, except Officer Vex-9's timeout is going to be much longer. With 5 minutes remaining, Commander Thex Prime made the decision that probably saved thousands of lives. Officer Vex-9, you will surrender yourself to human custody immediately. Vex-9's mandibles clicked furiously. I will not submit to alien justice. This is Council territory. Not anymore, Thex Prime replied grimly. Security, escort Officer Vex-9 to Docking Bay 7 for transfer to human custody. The next few minutes were chaos. Vex-9 resisted, declaring that his actions were justified under Council regulations. His fellow security officers looked torn between loyalty and self-preservation. Several delegates tried to leave the chamber, apparently deciding they didn't want to witness whatever was about to happen. But the most interesting reaction came from Emma herself. As security officers moved to apprehend Vex-9, she walked over to where he was struggling and looked up at him with those enormous human eyes. "Mr. Vex-9," she said in her small, clear voice, "I forgive you." Vex-9 stopped struggling. Everyone in the chamber went silent. But Emma continued, "My daddy says that forgiveness doesn't mean there aren't consequences. You hurt me, and that wasn't okay. So you have to go with the other humans now and learn why it's not okay to hurt children." The simplicity and maturity of her statement left the entire chamber speechless. 10 minutes later, Officer Vex-9 was transferred to human custody. I watched through the docking bay viewports as he was escorted aboard a human shuttle by Marines who looked like they were restraining themselves from expressing their personal opinions about his character. Admiral Morrison's final communication was brief and professional. "Station Command, Officer Vex-9 is now in human custody. He will face trial under United Earth Alliance military justice. Thank you for your cooperation in resolving this matter diplomatically." The human fleet began withdrawing from the system, their formation as precise and intimidating as their arrival had been. But Captain Torres and Emma remained on the station for one more day. I found Torres in the observation lounge that evening, watching the last of the human ships disappear into hyperspace. Emma was asleep in his arms, finally looking like the child she was instead of the diplomatic incident she had become. "Captain," I said, approaching carefully, "may I ask what will happen to Officer Vex-9?" Torres was quiet for a long moment. "He'll get a fair trial. Human military justice isn't about revenge, despite what some people think. He'll be evaluated, probably sentenced to rehabilitation and community service. That seems lenient." Torres smiled, and for the first time since the incident it reached his eyes. "Krill 448, the punishment isn't really the point. The point is that every species in this sector now knows exactly how humanity responds when someone hurts our children." I considered that. "A demonstration. A lesson," Torres corrected. "We don't want to conquer anyone or start wars. We just want everyone to understand that human children are off limits. Forever." He shifted Emma to a more comfortable position, and she mumbled something in her sleep about Mr. Buttons needing a bath. "You know what the really beautiful part is?" Torres continued. "Emma's going to grow up knowing that when someone hurt her, thousands of humans she'd never met dropped everything to make sure she was safe. That's the kind of species we are." 3 weeks later, I received a package at my office. Inside was a hand-drawn picture from Emma showing stick figures of humans and aliens playing together, along with a note that said, "Thank you for being nice to me and Daddy. Love, Emma." There was also a formal commendation from Admiral Morrison, thanking me for my objective documentation of events leading to successful diplomatic resolution. I framed both items and hung them on my office wall. 6 months later, Officer Vex-9 was released from human custody. He had completed a rehabilitation program that included extensive education about child psychology, human cultural values, and conflict de-escalation techniques. He returned to council service as a junior administrator, assigned to filing reports in the agricultural sector. He never worked security again. The incident became required study material at the Galactic Diplomatic Academy, taught as an example of how quickly routine situations can escalate when cultural differences aren't properly understood. But more importantly, it established what became known as the Emma Doctrine, an informal but universally understood rule that human children under diplomatic protection were to be treated with the same care and respect as heads of state. Because the galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their military technology or their tactical brilliance. It was their absolute, unwavering commitment to protecting their young. And anyone foolish enough to test that commitment would find themselves face to face with the full might of a species that had clawed its way up from the bottom of a death world by never, ever abandoning their own. Emma Torres grew up to become a diplomat herself, specializing in interspecies relations and child welfare advocacy. She kept Mr. Buttons on her desk throughout her career as a reminder that even the smallest voices deserve to be heard. And somewhere in the agricultural filing department, a former security officer spent his days processing grain shipment reports and thinking very carefully about the consequences of violence. The galaxy was a safer place for children because of it. All because one little girl refused to let go of her teddy bear, and her species refused to let go of her.